aesthetics, if you like, the philosophy of art. Now you're thinking, what on earth is that doing in a human studies degree? And most of my fellow colleagues were thinking, what the hell is this doing? It was like a year's suffering. Talking about theories of art, or whether sport could be an art form, or whether sports were beautiful, a whole year of that. And most of these guys, there were about 80 on the course, and about 70 were blokes, and about 60 of those were rugby players. Can you imagine a poor woman who had to teach them? Can you imagine teaching 60 rugby players all about the philosophy of art? It was like, I don't know, like penance. She must have done something really bad in her previous life. Anyway, that was my piece of luck. Because I realised what they were trying to do here is they were trying to call this degree Human Movement Studies, but it was really half of an old PE, and a little bit of the new sports science. And I realised I didn't think like a scientist. I thought conceptually. So I thought in a radically different way to most of my colleagues. So I really loved this philosophy and aesthetics course, and I've distinguished myself on it. Whereas I can barely count past 10. I'm a humorist. I don't have a science qualification to my name. And next month I'm going to give a lecture at the Royal Society of Chemistry. I'm very proud. I'll be the first person who's ever done that, and I haven't even got like an age 16 qualification in science. I hate it. I hated school, period. But I really hated science. So I found myself on this degree, which really was a BEd PE degree, called something different, in which I had to study philosophy. Now the woman who taught this course, luckily, she had a year sabbatical to go and do a master's. And her master's was an MA in physical education, and I went and did that course a few years later. The reason why I went there is because there was this really unusual guy teaching the course. He'd been a professional soccer player, but he also was a trained philosopher. Now, in the world, there was one of those. And I was just lucky. I went to Cardiff, where one of the members of staff had studied with this one guy. Complete luck. Complete contingency. So if that one lady had not gone to do a master's degree the year before, I wouldn't be here today, and I wouldn't have a PhD in philosophy and all those kinds of things. So that's complete luck. What I got really interested in, though, throughout the course of my undergraduate career, just like you, was not just sport, which I absolutely loved. I was a modest sportsman. I played lots of sports at varsity level, but I was never a great sportsman. Jock of all trades, as they say. Like most of you. But what I got really interested in is, why is it that most people think what we're doing, what you're doing, is somehow different in educational status from your colleagues over on the main campus, who are doing engineering, or biology, or botany, or maths, or English? Because that's the way it is, isn't it? This subject, for whatever reason, is seen educationally as a second-tier activity. Somehow unconnected with the serious business of education, or higher education. And sport in schools has always suffered from that educational status problem. And it's no accident that sport in higher education has also suffered from that low status problem. I could say after 30 years of sports science in the UK, or now sport and exercise science, as it's almost universally called, it's starting to break down a few of those barriers, but the prejudice is really rather strong. And the word jock, though I'm perfectly comfortable with it, is I think an educationally abusive phrase. I think people only use it when they want to derogate you, when they want to, as it were, put you down. Now, is it just flat bias? Well, I think partly. I spent a lot of time in my master's degree then trying to work through philosophically this problem. Why is it that physical education has got such a bad rap in educational terms? Is it just a set of prejudices or biases, or is there some logical core to that? Is there some proper and genuine, rational set of reasons why PE is thought to be second division. So I did my master's thesis on this problem, and very luckily I got a scholarship for that, and I got another scholarship to take it to PhD level. And really the question is about trying to locate what's educational about PE. So that's a very long preamble, but I think it's important to give you that kind of context, what I'm now going to do. So I'm going to go through a lecture. What time have I got to finish?
We about 22, quarter two? Yeah.
So I've got an hour. Okay.
Oh, we've got an hour. Okay, yeah. You don't need to take an hour though, just whatever.
Okay. Well, what I'd like you to do is I'd invite you to ask questions. Right. So the lecture will be much more lively if you start asking some questions. So if I use a word, or if I even pronounce a word with my kind of Welsh English accent that you don't understand, just stick your hand up and say, can you say that again, or can you explain? But I really want you to be interactive and be brave. Really fine philosopher. When I was your age, I heard this really good philosopher talk, quite inspiring. And he said to me, and everybody else in the audience, there's no such thing as a stupid question if you ask it honestly. He said, if you sit here the whole lecture, and you've missed one or two words, and that just switches you off from the lecture, that's stupid. So be brave, stick your hand up, ask a question. So I'll call the next lecturer Attempting to Locate Education in PE. And this is the content, but I'll just say, this is an article that I wrote about it a long time ago. And this is a slightly more formal one, and I probably wouldn't bother with that, to be honest. But this one's not so. At the same time that I was doing my, starting my PhD, there was this kind of revolution in British education. And you can imagine that they had examination boards that tried to lay down a curriculum. But really, the curriculum in PE was rather varied, and maybe depended on what kind of authority, local authority, what place in Britain you were going to go and teach in, who kind of structured it one way, and maybe it was down to what department you worked in. You know, if you worked into a place where they had maybe only one woman, maybe you weren't going to get dance and hockey and netball. Maybe you were just going to get one of those three. If you worked in a department which had three guys, you're probably going to get the full sports curriculum, but not dance. So in response to that, the people who are pretty much in charge of physical education in Britain tried, along with other subjects, to lay down a definitive national curriculum, which you've had reasonably recently, yeah? Reasonably recently. Part of thinking through what the subject should look like at a national level is partly also thinking about what's our subject all about. I'll give you a little quote. The quote is from George Santayana, the philosopher. He said, "The fanatic is the person who redoubles their efforts when they've forgotten their aims." Sort of head down, arse up. Here's a problem, let's just cycle harder. And his point is, if you want to think hard about what you're doing, sometimes you have to stand back and consider, what is the nature and the purposes of the activity to which I am committed? And that's what they had to do about phys ed. What's really interesting is the period of evolution over the last 20 years. England and Wales have separated. Scotland has always been different. It's got its own educational policies and programmes. But they've sent through very recently a new document about the national curriculum, and they've laid it out in a very interesting style. I've got a copy of it, and I'll leave it with you. But you know, it doesn't say a single thing about the aims of physical education. I find that professionally embarrassing. I mean, if you're laying out a national curriculum and you didn't set out in the very first pages, what is it that we're trying to achieve here? What is the nature of our subject and what it can afford educationally to people? If you fail to do that, I think you're in a case of professional negligence. That's my view. However, at least in 88 and 90, when they were trying to work through these problems, it's kind of an identity crisis, really. If I asked you for a definition of physical education, I bet you wouldn't give me one which I couldn't create an exception to. Nor you, none of you. Why not? Well, because what is physical education is a really tough question. it looks simple, like what's the time? Because it's given the same grammatical structure. What is X? What is physical education is a really difficult question. And it's partly historical, because there are different kinds of answers to that question. If you say, what's physical education in New Zealand? What's physical education in Russia? Or in China? In a way, you're going to get different answers. Partly because of the historical development of the subject in those countries, and partly because the answer to the question is socially and culturally conditioned by those countries and their practices and policies and ideologies. But here's a couple of really important questions that I think you should be able to address, but which I don't think you are able to address yet. But come your graduation in 3.5 years' time or whatever, if you can't give an answer to some of these questions, I think you're in trouble. It means you cannot articulate what's educational about your subject. And then you're just going to go on and reproduce that kind of stereotype, the dumb job, which has been so harmful to the subject. So, to what does physical education refer? Now, is that a statement of a logical truth or just a claim? I want to be called an educationalist just like the maths teacher, physics teacher, biology teacher. I mean, in some aspects of British sport and education, you've got this kind of public schooling history, and you'll know you've got this private schooling history. We call the private schools public schools. I know it's very confusing. What it means is fee-paying schools. The great schools of England, you might think, like Eton, Harrow, all those places where wealthy, posh boys are sent off to schooling. But they don't call it phys ed there by and large. They call it games. And in some places, even in the public schooling, they used to make a distinction between phys ed and gym. Do these kind of labels connect with you? Do they have this kind of history in New Zealand as well? Where you distinguish phys ed and games, or phys ed and gym?
Not so much. It was more physical training, and then it became physical education.
Oh yeah, well when I was in school they used to call it PT.
Yeah.
Did that still survive physical training?
It was well before these guys' time, but yeah.
Yeah, well I'm old. Thanks for reminding me. Cheers, appreciate that.
I mean in New
Bring a
Zealand.
guest lecture of Fusion, right?
I mean in New Zealand, Mike.
But it's really interesting. What's the difference then between PT, because that's what I did when I was in school, PT, that's what they do in the military. In the army, they call it PT. In the Navy, they call it PT. Army, Navy, what's the other one? The Air Force, there you go, that's the one. Yeah, they call it PT as well. So what's different about what you're doing? Because we call it PE.
Actually, the distinction we use in New Zealand, sorry Mike,
Yeah.
I was thinking about it. Primary schools in New Zealand talk a lot about physical activity.
All right, there you go.
Yeah, so this is the
That's the analogue then.
Yeah.
That'll do for me.
Yeah.
But they called it PT in Britain. Physical jerks. Nowadays, if you use that kind of physical jerk, it's like a term of abuse. Who do you call a jerk? But that's actually the language they used to use in the 60s. Now, what made PT, PE, or in your case, what made PA, physical activity, PE? Is it just somebody said, we better start calling ourselves education, otherwise we're going to be different to everybody else. But not just different, but worse. So what makes PA, PE? I'm going to give you 1 minute, talk to the person next to you, and I want a clear answer to that question, and I want it written down in a one-line sentence. What makes PA, PE?
It's got an education factor. Yeah. I think I'm trying to bring in like an education something. Like PE schools just like including what Harry learning.
Because at high school,
It's more just being understanding.
I'm just looking at it now. There's a lot of meat to go to work for. That's what we learn about.
I think the ideally PE is
Attitudes and values.
probably.
Yeah, I remember like PG said. Yeah, still there.
I had the worst PE teacher in the world. We just
My golf was like 25 minutes.
no, it's way too early.
Oh, it was like biomechanics of golf? Oh, yeah, we did that. Teams. We videoed it and stuff.
We just sit there like, we just bang.
Okay, what I want you to do is I want you to write it down though. Don't cop out and just say, well, we had a chat about it. I want you to commit yourself to some words, because I'm just going to pick on 6 people randomly to get some answers. And you don't want to go, well, we had a nice chat about it. No, that won't do. I want some words. Say what you mean and mean what you say. If you want some context for it, I suppose you've been doing ancient Greece. They sure as hell wouldn't have called the kind of things that they did in ancient Greece physical education. That might have been what's going on, might have been, but I doubt it. But they wouldn't have called it physical education.
And then like education.
They would have called it athletics. But they wouldn't have called it phys ed. So, is that just plain? Or does that mean something different? Does that really mean something different? You're engaged in a set of activities that are particular or unique, or that you're engaged in a certain kind of way? Now, I'm just going to pick on people, so be brave, bear with me. I'm not expecting a pre-packaged, pristine proposition which is faultless or error-free, but I'm going to expect something. And you're first up.
Am I okay?
Just do it right. Don't get embarrassed about it, because if I was 18 and I was a smart 18, or a smart ass 18-year-old, but I would not have given you like the dictionary definition off the top of my head. So I'm not expecting you to do it. Just give it your best shot.
We came up with the view that
we, not me. So that's a nice one.
No, it was me pretty much.
So it's his fault if it's wrong. Okay.
That PT was more like a physical view, and compared to PE being more like a holistic view, learning through the mind and the body.
Okay, can you say that again for me? Can you say it a little bit louder, because I'm going to have to put my hearing aids on.
Okay, we came up with the idea that PT was more from like a physical point of view and just the body, whereas PE was more like came from a holistic like background and was learning through the mind and the body rather than just the body.
Okay, well, that sounds like a really good start. Well done. What do you mean, though? Learning through the body. Can you tell me what you mean by that?
I mean, just like no mental side to it, or not as much compared to PE.
Yeah, well, give me an example. Actually, get your mate to give me an example, right? Because you've been doing this all.
They're just training through, like, just games. There's not really any understanding of what's actually happening, if you get what I mean.
So there's going to be some kind of distinction between people who can just do and the people who can understand what they're doing and why they might be doing it and so forth. And that might be the crucial... My batteries have run out. That might be the crucial distinction you're after. Okay, that's a good start. What have we got on this table then? Can I go for you?
Speak up loudly, guys.
We just talked about how there's a lot more education and theory to it, and it's a lot more, well, I'm going to steal Jesse's word here.
Now, one thing you can't do, if I say what's the difference between PA and PE, physical education, you can't just say, well, there's more education to it, because if I knew what that meant, I wouldn't have asked you the question. So, can you unpack what it means to say that one's more educational, or one's educational and the other's not, or is less?
You learn more theory rather than just doing the actual just exercise more base.
Yeah.
So you actually learn more theory and work more into that.
Here's a funny thought for you though, because I haven't asked you to define physical education in schools or physical education at university. I haven't asked you about levels yet, but I think one of the things that happened when PE underwent that revolution in the UK is they started forcing people to study more those intellectual subjects. Or let's call them something like foundational disciplines, like philosophy, history, sociology, politics, psychology, biomechanics, physiology, anatomy, those kind of foundational disciplines or subjects underpinning the what and the why of physical movements. And what that did, I think, is it created a profession that was better educated. Now, does it follow because they were better educated, they went on to become better teachers? That's a really critical question. That's a really, and I'm not actually convinced it did. And I don't know if we can go into that today, but I'm not convinced it did, but it's a question I want to raise with you. Somehow, because the profession of physical education became all graduate, I don't think it followed from that we necessarily started producing better teachers. And one of the things that also happened because it became all graduate, and they were starting to study more philosophy, history, politics, sociology, physiology, biomechanics, psychology, one of the other things that happened is people with that knowledge, they wanted to use it. So they started to transform the physical education curricula in schools to teach people more about simple exercise physiology or the psychology of skill acquisition. And I'm thinking, hang on a minute now, what I loved about PE is that was the one subject where we weren't doing that stuff. We were just playing or learning body management skills